Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to Community Church. We are glad that you are here. My name is Tom. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your Memorial Day weekend to be with us. What we're going to do in the next few moments is spend some time singing together. Essentially what we're doing is putting our affection for God into song. And you're welcome to sing with us. The words will be on the far screens and sneakily behind us over here. But if this is your first time or you're not sure what it means to sing to God, that's no problem. You're welcome to stay seated and be comfortable. You're also welcome to stand and give it a shot. And if you're joining us online, wherever you might be, thank you so much for taking some time to be with us. We're hoping that you're having a wonderful weekend. But we're going to get started, so you are all welcome to stand and join us.
More than I could ask or seek, more than I could fathom. God, your love for me is better than I imagined. More than I could ask or seek, more than I could fathom. God, your love for me is better than I imagined. More than I could ask or seek, more than I could fathom. God, your love for me is better than I imagined.
All right, you can have a seat. Thanks for being here with us today, or thanks for joining us online. If we haven't met before, my name is Lou, and I'm one of the pastors here. And if you're new here, we're really glad that you decided to spend some of your Memorial Day weekend with us. We've got a gift for you that we'd love for you to pick up downstairs at our information center. There'll be someone there that'll give you that gift. And if you'd like to talk to them or have any questions about the church, they should be able to answer all your questions there. Also, if you're interested in letting us know that you joined us, you can do that at communitychurch.net/connect and fill out a little form that's right on that page. It'll take just a minute. And that'll let us know that you're here. And just to say thanks for doing that, we'll send you a little gift card this week in the mail. So in a few weeks, we have something exciting coming up. We're calling it Sunday Dinner. This will be the third time that we've done it. It's on Sunday, and it's a dinner. It's right here and also downstairs. And basically what we do, there's not really much of an agenda, but it's just an opportunity to get to know some people, to connect with some people at the church. We take communion together, which is fun and new and different for a lot of people who haven't done it in a setting like that. And sometimes we even do baptisms. And so it's a really upbeat, exciting, energizing night of community. And so if you've been here for a few weeks and maybe you'd like to get a little bit more connected, but you're not quite sure about groups, or you don't want to, this is a great thing to just kind of take the next little step forward. So Sunday dinner, that's June 12th. It starts at 5 p.m. and you can sign up right on the app. If you go to the Community Church app under events, or if you go to communitychurch.net under events, right there you can click and just let us know you're coming. That would be a huge help so we know how much food to buy. We try to be really careful about the way that we talk about money here. We don't pass a plate. Some of you may have noticed that, really because we never want people to feel pressured to give. But we are here today because there are some really generous people in our community. And if you'd like to partner with us financially, you can do that at communitychurch.net/give, or you can scan a little QR code right on your screen if you're watching online. All right? That's just about all I've got for you. We're going to get right back to singing in just a minute, but before we do that, I'd like to take just a minute and pray together before we go further into the service. God, thank you for this time that we have here today, that I know I take for granted often, time where I can regain some perspective, time where I could be with like-minded people, people who care about me, time where I could learn a little bit about you, be encouraged, hopefully find answers to what I'm looking for. God, and I know that I take that for granted, and we're grateful for days like tomorrow, weekends like this weekend, when we can recognize the price that was paid so that we could have the freedom to do the things that we do here in this country. And so, God, we are so grateful for the people who have given so much for us, even though we may never meet them. God, we pray today for our country, for the heartbreak that so many of us are dealing with, for the questions that so many of us have here in light of what's happened in Texas this week. God, we know that you comfort those who need comfort, that you are near to the brokenhearted. That our pain, our questions, our uncertainty, our anxiety, our fear is not something that you take lightly, not something that you overlook. And so, God, would you meet us in our questions? For the families that are experiencing such great loss, God, would you meet them in their grief? For those who are dealing with the fear and uncertainty, the reality of the brokenness that lives in our world, God, would you be with those people as well? Would you meet us where we are? Not just here today, but this week, in our questions, our fear, our anxiety, our uncertainty, when we deal with the brokenness in ourselves and the brokenness of others. And would you be with us here in this hour, in this time we have together? Speak to the needs of our hearts, as you have done so many times before, whether that we're confident in you, doubting, totally sure that you're here with us, or totally convinced that you don't even exist. Would you meet us where we are and give us what we need? In Jesus' name we pray, amen. All right, we're gonna jump back into it. If you'd like to join us, you're welcome to stand.
Speak to me when the silence steals my voice. You understand me. You understand me. Come to me in the valley of unknowns. You understand me. You understand me. You understand me, God. You understand me. So I throw all my cares before you. My doubts and fears don't scare you. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought. So I stop all negotiations with the God of all creation. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought you were. I believe, but help my unbelief. You understand me. You understand me. Help me reach the faith that's underneath. You understand me. You understand me. Understand me, God. You understand me. So I throw all my cares before you. My doubts and fears don't scare you. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought. So I stop all negotiations with the God of all creation. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought you were. I will rest in the Father's hands. Leave the rest in the Father's hands. I will rest in the Father's hands. Leave the rest in the Father's hands. I will rest in the Father's hands. Leave the rest in the Father's
with us, you may have a seat.
All right. Well, it's great to be back with you. If you're a regular here, last week I wasn't here. Had a little something that's been going around the past 2 years. But yeah, everything's great now, and I'm really glad to be back. It also, whenever I start to feel important, it's great to see how everything just runs without a hitch when I'm not here. And I think it says a lot about Tom, who's got to do everything in this room, and the team back there, and so I appreciate you guys. This week, we're starting a brand new series. We're calling it Throwbacks. Hope you enjoyed the throwback pictures and our little bumper there. But here's how we'll kick things off. So in my family, holidays are a really big deal, and we have this big, grand meal at the holiday, and there's a dinner, and we all sit around the table, and we will stay at that table for hours telling stories. We just tell stories for hours, and these stories become kind of famous stories in my family, right? Like there was 1 year where my mom is an amazing cook, but 1 year for Thanksgiving, she tried this new recipe on the mashed potatoes on Thanksgiving from her Norwegian friend, and our family just could not get over the fact that she took a risk on the mashed potatoes, and so that became this big thing, and no one let her live it down, even though she's this incredible cook. 1 year, my dad tripped over a tree stump while he was chasing my dog, and his knee hurt for the next 3 years, which is not really funny, but we tell that story a lot. There's another time where we were in church on Christmas Eve, this real traditional church, and we had to leave the service early because my cousins got the giggles, and they couldn't stop laughing, so we ended up And so these stories kind of go down in history, and we tell them at these big holiday dinners and tables. And then some of us got married, and my wife Allie started coming to the dinners, and my brother-in-law, my sister-in-law started coming, and one day, my brother-in-law, at one of these dinners, it might have been Thanksgiving, he looks over at my wife, right? The two outsiders who have now joined the family. And he looks at her and he goes, have you realized they just keep telling the same stories? And she was like, yes. And we looked at him like, yeah, I guess we never thought about it like that. But yeah, we just keep telling the same family stories. And we don't stop because that's just how we do it, So Jesus grew up in a culture of storytellers. They told stories frequently. And what's interesting about Jesus is that it's a little different from us. Like his nationality and his religion were actually like the same thing. He was a Jewish person, and the Jewish people understood themselves as really one big family. And so they had these family stories that they told over and over and over again. So like we're just trying to be like Jesus, all right, my Italian family. But they told these stories over and over and over again. They were these classic stories, these old throwback stories. These were the stories that Jesus would have been told as a little boy. And what's so amazing about these stories is that, like, often we hear stories and there's a hero in the story, and they're inspiring, but it's not really applicable because they're on another level, like Superman, he's amazing, we all get excited, but he can fly, he's got the vision and the powers and the and it's like, okay, I'm inspired by The people in these stories are just regular people with issues. And some of them have really strong faith, and others, meh. Like they're not totally sure. They don't totally get, and maybe that's like where you are today. Maybe you're like, I'm not totally sure. Or maybe you're like, no, I'm definitely sure. I don't believe any of this, but I'm here anyway. Like even just knowing that maybe could help you see these stories a little bit differently. And the stories, while there are people in the stories are actually all about God. All about God. And they show us what it looks like to try and trust him. And so we're gonna look at some of these throwback classic stories, and I think what you'll see, especially if you're not familiar with them, is they are as relatable now as they were literally thousands of years ago. So the story that we're looking at in the time that we have today answers this question. It's a question, it's not really a genuine question, but it's a question I've found myself asking like many times before. Maybe you have. It's a question that indicates a sense of like helplessness and hopelessness. The question is, what's the point? Have you ever found yourself there? It's the question of helplessness and hopelessness. Like there's not much I can do and it won't make much of a difference. You know, maybe this is in a relationship and you're just so buried in issues and conflict and difficulty, and you can keep going, but there's this feeling like, what's the point? What's the point? There's not much I can do. It won't make much of a difference. Or maybe it's with your career, your dreams of where you're gonna go one day, and it's just over and over again. It seems like nothing's and you have a choice. You can continue to move forward. You can continue to do the next right thing. You can continue to go or you can just be like, what's the point? Not much I can do, and it won't make much of a difference. Maybe you're under a mountain, an seemingly insurmountable mountain of debt in your own life, and it's just feel I could try and get things to get, but what's the point? There's not much I could do. Maybe you're in a toxic environment in your workplace or in your school or in your family, and there's part of you that wants to try and make a change. There's part of you that wants to try to be, but it's like, well, what's the point? There's not much I can do, and it's really not gonna make much of a difference. What's the point? It's a question of helplessness, not much I can do, and hopelessness, it won't make a difference. The story that we're looking at today answers that question. And for me personally, like especially over the last 2 years, there was a distinct moment. My wife and I were watching something online, because that's where you watch things instead of going to things, right? And someone told this story that I had heard so many times before, but it gave me the perspective that I needed to keep going forward when there were constant feelings of what's the point? What's the point? The story that we're looking at is the story of someone named Esther. Esther. Now, what you need to know about Esther is at this time, Esther was a Jewish person. She was one of the Jewish people. Now, the Jewish people, real quick, a little background here. The Jewish people, they believed that God had promised them, remember family? Like they were one gigantic family under Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, right? And they were gonna have all this land that was one day gonna be theirs. They were gonna be free. It was gonna be flowing, milk and honey. It was gonna be fantastic. It was supposed to be great, right? But then things started going the wrong direction. And all of a sudden they were conquered by Babylon. But not us, you know, no swell taco, like a much worse Babylon. These are the bad guys. And so it's like, well, what the heck? Where's God? You know, we were supposed to have, now we're conquered under Babylonian rule. Then this other group of people come in, the Persians, and they conquer Babylon. So this is like if you're at school and you're on the playground and you have a bully who takes your lunch money, but then all of a sudden a bigger bully comes along and starts taking your lunch money and like conquers the first little bully, and now you're just under, like you're 2 bullies deep. That's where they were in the story of Esther. They have been conquered, and then their conquerors have been conquered. And these people who were thinking like, we're supposed to be free on our own, are just thinking there's no shot. We are so oppressed. It's really a hard time for these people. It feels like God's not around. And so here's the story. If you're a visual person, we got some pictures, okay? The story starts out, we meet somebody named Xerxes. He's the king of Persia. He's blue, all right? And now this guy, he never really is doing anything impressive. He's kind of portrayed as a big mush. He's always wasted every time we hear about him. He doesn't do anything really noble or significant. He's kind of a pushover. But he loves his power, okay? So he's in charge of the big Persian Empire, and one day he decides to have a party to celebrate himself. And it's not just one day, it's many days of just partying. There's an open bar. He tells everyone to drink as much as they want because he's the man, all right? And so this is the kind of world that the Jewish people are living in. And he's got one wife named Vashti. And one day he's like, you know what, I'm feeling pretty good about myself. Let me show off my wife to everyone. And so he calls out, he's like, bring me Vashti. And back then, husband and wife, like they weren't close, you know, they didn't wake up in the morning and read the paper together or share their feelings or go to counseling. She would have been seen like as one of his possessions. So he's like, all right, all my pals are here. Let me show off my wife to everyone. And then we meet Vashti, and she's basically like, yeah, no. And she just refuses to come, which is crazy. This guy is in charge of an extremely powerful empire. In fact, he was so powerful, you couldn't go to him and ask him for anything. If you did, you were breaking the law, and he could just kill you on the spot for simply asking him a question. Now, there were certain cases where he could make an exception, and he would hold out his golden scepter, and that would mean like, all right, fine, ask your question. But for the most part, you didn't even go near this person, and when he told you to do something, you did it. And Vashti is like, nah, I'm not gonna come in and parade myself in front of your friends so that you can look cool. And so guess what? She's not the queen anymore, and she's out. And so now he needs another queen. And this is where they have this big, grand beauty pageant. And they get all these women together. It's basically like the ancient version of The Bachelor, you know, like which one of us can get the king to like us. And it's kind of sketchy, right? And this king, he's not really all that fantastic anyway. But this is where we meet Esther. Now, Esther, we're told, is pretty attractive, and the king is crazy about her. He's really into her. Esther, though, is one of those Jewish people that's living in Persia, but she doesn't tell anyone. So she's hiding her real identity, and the king is crazy about her. And so the king decides, all right, you're gonna be my wife. And so what she does, this is interesting, for 12 months, she goes away to prepare herself. Like she's basically getting manicures and pedicures, and there's all these oils, and it's just to, you know, pretty her up to give her to the king. And so she goes through with that for 12 months, and then she becomes the queen, and the king is just head over heels for her. Now, little background, all right? Esther grew up an orphan. She didn't have parents, and so she was cared for by a guy named Mordecai. He's orange. Mordecai. Now, Mordecai's a pretty good guy. He's actually her cousin, and he just decides, I'm gonna take care of her because she doesn't have parents. And so she's the queen, and Mordecai is still doing his thing in the town like he was doing before, but now he's got this connection to the king because he was at one point taking care of Esther. All right? So there we are right now, right? Esther is the queen, Xerxes is the king, and you got Mordecai who's just doing his thing. Well, one day, side little story, seems kind of random. Mordecai's just out, you know, food shopping at Costco, we don't know, just out. And he hears a conversation about the king. These two guys decide they're gonna kill Xerxes. And so Mordecai hears that, and Xerxes is not the hero of the story, right? He probably is not incredibly moved with compassion and determination, but he's like, you know what? I probably should say something about this. And so he goes to Esther and he's like, just so you know, there's a plan to kill the king. And he ends up saving the king. And so Xerxes continues to have his parties and rule, and great, Xerxes is still the king. Well, then we meet this other guy. This is the bad guy of the story. His name is Haman. He's green, all right? Haman is the number 2 under the king. And he was appointed by Xerxes right after all this happened. And Haman, surprise, loves himself. Just thinks he is, God's gift to the world. And so he decides, you know what? I think, as a second in command, I'm going to have people bow to me. Just like that's just what they're going to do when they see me. They're going to treat me like I'm the man because I am. I'm number 2. And so he does this. Well, he runs into Mordecai, and Mordecai is like, nope, sorry, not going to bow to you. And Haman can't take this. It just drives him crazy that this guy Mordecai won't bow to him. And so he comes up with this big plan. He's not just going to get rid of Mordecai. He's going to get rid of all of the Jewish people, all of them. And so he goes to the king. He comes up with this plan. He's angry. He's like, look, there's a group of people out there. They don't care about you. They don't respect you. They don't listen to what you say. They think you're dumb. He just builds this whole case. And he's like, we need to get rid of them. And he says, I'll even pay for it. And the king says, keep your money, but we're going to get rid of those people. And so he makes this big edict, this decree. In 11 months, all the Jewish people would be killed, wiped out from Persia. And so, understandably, Mordecai hears this, and he's broken. He's distraught. He's depressed. We don't know. Maybe he was blaming himself partially, but it's not just him that's going to be punished. It's now all of his people. And Esther apparently doesn't know about the decree, but she hears that Mordecai is upset. And so she sends one of her messengers to find out what the deal is. Why is he so upset? And Mordecai talks to this messenger and basically says, the king is going to wipe all of us out. You need to go to the king and beg for our lives. And the king doesn't even know that Esther is Jewish. And then they have this conversation, which becomes a pretty famous conversation. Here's what happens. Esther says this. After Mordecai tells her to go in, Esther says, all of the king's officials and people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law. If you haven't been invited, the king's got one law for you, that they be put to death. Unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their lives. She's in essence, she's saying, there's no chance. I'm gonna lose my life just for doing that. This is also a challenge to his power. She's challenging one of his decrees. Again, there was no closeness in this relationship. This would have been her coming to say, I don't like the way you're running the kingdom. You've got to change things. P.S. You don't know who I really am. I'm one of those people. It's as if she's saying, what's the point? There's not much I can do, and it's not going to make much of a difference. And so Mordecai comes back pretty strong, and he says, don't think that because you're in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief for the Jews will arise from another place. This is a pretty crazy statement. He's saying if you don't do it, God will somehow save his people eventually in some way. He's not going to turn his back on all of us. But he says, but you and your father's family will perish. His line, this was a big deal to them. His line would be gone from the story of Israel. He's saying there's something on the line here. And then he says these words. He says, and who knows, but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Maybe there's a reason why you are where you are. And so Esther replies, she says, go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa, that's the capital of Persia, and fast for me. Start praying and don't eat. Don't eat or drink for 3 days, night or day, and I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it's against the law. And if I perish, I perish. It's not some bold statement of faith, right? There still is this tone of what's the point? There's not much I can do, and it won't, but if I die, I die. I'll give it a shot here. And so she goes to the king, and she goes with a request, and he instead of killing her, he holds out that golden scepter and says, okay, ask me for what you want. And she asks him kind of a weird thing. She says, will you come to my banquet, right? She's got to butter him up first. And he says, okay. So they decide to have a banquet. And she invites Haman, too. So it's the three of them at this banquet. Esther, Haman, and King Xerxes. And so the banquet's going really well. And while they're there, the king knows, okay, this isn't really what you wanted. Tell me your request. And she says, all right, I've got another request. Ready? Will you come to my next banquet tomorrow night? Like really just laying it on thick, you know? And then she says, I'll tell you what I want. So he says, okay. So as soon as the party ends, Haman leaves, right? And he's like just out doing his thing, and he sees Mordecai. And he's reminded that this guy is the guy that won't do what he wants him to do. And here they're in the same situation. He's like, I'm still not budging, and he can't take it. And so he decides, I'm putting an end to Mordecai. He goes into the middle of town, he erects this stake, and decides in the morning, I'm not waiting 11 months. The rest of the Jews can die in 11 months, but in the morning, Mordecai is going to be put on display, and he'll be impaled in front of everybody. We're going to kill him. And so while all this is happening, the king is at home. And apparently he can't sleep. You know, he's had some insomnia, and there's no ZQuil back then. And so he calls one of his subjects and is like, will you read to me? And this subject is like, all right, what do you want me to read? And he's like, the one about me. And so they recorded the King's Chronicles. He's like, all right, fine. And so he starts reading all the things that the king has done, you know? And he's just sitting there listening to stories about himself. And he gets to the part where Mordecai saved his life that day when he was at Costco. And the two people were talking. And he all of a sudden realizes, we need to do something for this guy. What have we done? And the guy's like, nothing. We didn't acknowledge him. And so right after that, he gets with Haman, his number two, the bad guy in the story. And he goes, Haman, what shall we do for the man that the king delights to honor? For someone I want to make a big deal of. And Haman's sitting there and he's like, oh, he's talking about me. And so he's like, go big. Let's get a horse. Let's get a robe. We'll parade this person around town. People will cheer for them. It'll be amazing, big deal, fantastic, right? And he's like, good idea. Go do that for Mordecai. And so here the whole story just starts to flip. And now we see Haman giving honor to Mordecai. Now, there weren't people actually bowing to him, but I'm trying to show you there's a little flip there, right? Now, Mordecai's the one who's getting all the respect, and Haman's walking around, pulling him along on a pony ride while people cheer for him throughout the streets, okay? Rough day for Haman. However, and Mordecai doesn't die. He ends up on a horse, not on the pole. So that night, there's the party, all right? At least Haman's day gets to end with a party. It's a second banquet, and Esther's like, welcome back. No, she didn't say that. But the king wants to know, okay, what is it? What is it that you really want? And then she comes out with her question and she says, would you please spare my people? I'm a Jewish person. And Haman is trying to kill us. And this makes the king furious. Not at Esther, but at Haman. And so the king actually leaves for a little while, and then Haman begins to plead for his life to Esther. And then the king walks in while Haman is pleading with her. And the king thinks that Haman is trying to put the moves on her, and he just can't stand it. And so he ends up, that stake that Haman set up for Mordecai ends up being a stake for Haman. And Mordecai ends up being given Haman's job and Haman's house. And from there, everything just about flips around. He makes a decree that protects Esther's people, Mordecai, everything kind of comes together in the end. And Haman goes down and the Jewish people are elevated. It becomes a day. Actually, Jewish people still celebrate this day, this whole event. It's a holiday. It's called Purim. It's like their Jewish Halloween. It's in March. And in the story, it says we'll celebrate this forever. And they continue to celebrate it today. It's pretty interesting. So there's a story, right? Story of Esther. Pretty amazing. Pretty cool. Nice little flip. Probably make a great movie. I think they have made a movie. I haven't seen it, but pretty neat story. I told you in the beginning, these stories, they're about God, right? Did you catch the part of the story where they talked about God? Now, I know I didn't read it, and there was no Costco, but throughout this entire story, God is actually not mentioned one time. Not once. The story of Esther is what faith looks like when God is absent. If you take a step back and really, really try to put yourself in the shoes of these people, they were supposed to have, they had this dream of being a nation that was going to flow with milk and honey. It was going to be amazing, fantastic, and they've been conquered. And it's like, where is God? And then their conqueror is conquered, and their hope is looking more and more bleak. And then, it's this idea, when the older people are like, no, one day we're gonna be there, we're gonna have our own, and they're looking at all these superpowers ahead of, it's like, yeah, maybe that religious stuff does something for you, but for me, we're too far away from reality for that to be real for me. And it feels like God has totally abandoned them. And then they're told, it just so happens, this guy rises to power who happens to hate them and decides, all right, I'm gonna wipe them all out. Imagine being told in 11 months, we're gone, you're gone. And you can't escape, you can't run. You got 11 months, and that's it for no reason because someone doesn't like you. And it's one bad thing after the next. There is this feeling like God has totally left them behind. But if you look at the details of the story, and what the person who documented this wants us to see is that throughout all of it, there's something going on in the background. Yes, they're in exile. Yes, Haman rose to power. Yes, there was an edict to kill them. But isn't it interesting that the king just so happened to like Esther? Isn't it interesting that Mordecai just happened to hear those people? Isn't it interesting that on the night before his death, the king can't sleep? Isn't it interesting that he just happens to be reading the story about the day when Mordecai saved him? What the writer of Esther, who's anonymous, by the way, what he's trying or she's trying to help us to see is that through all of this feeling of God being absent, he has not abandoned them. There is something going on behind the scenes, and none of them know it at the time. right? Mordecai's not thinking, I'm gonna help out the king here because one day this is gonna come back and work out and end up saving my life. He's got no idea. He's just doing the next right thing. He's taking the next right step. And all the while, God is doing something in the background. And maybe that's your story. Like maybe you're someone who would say, all right, if my life's a book, God's name isn't mentioned in it. Right? Like maybe you got baptized as a baby or took your communion, but really for the most part, you're like, no, I'm not God is not in my book. And maybe if you step back and you look at it, you might see that there was somebody doing something in the background, though you had no idea at the time and would never see unless you turn back and look. Or maybe there's an area of your life, right? Where maybe it's a book on the shelf of your life where God's name is not mentioned. And you would say like, yeah, no, I mean, I don't really talk to God about that part of my life. In fact, I'm not like too proud of it either. I don't think he's doing anything. It's like he's totally absent. Maybe there's something going on there and you won't realize it unless you're open to the fact that maybe some of these things are happening for a reason. That there is someone who is working in the background. Now, I don't know about you, but if you're like me, I read stories like this, and I usually have enough faith to think, oh, God can do that. He can. Where I struggle is believing that he will do that for me. Like there's other people out there who have it better, more figured out, a little more serious, devout, probably know as many issues as I have. And so let God do, and I'll hear about it on TV one day or at the end of a sermon, how God did something amazing in someone. But I don't feel like he'll do it for me. I'm no Esther. The amazing thing about Esther is she's really not the picture of like Sunday school devotion. Like think about it. There's a queen, Vashti, who's like, you're not gonna parade me in front of these men. And then Esther's like, all right. And she just steps in, right? Not only that, but in that culture at that time for the ancient Jewish people, they were not allowed to marry people outside of the Jewish community. And so her marrying the Persian king was a blatant disregard for the law. And for Mordecai to look at her and say, maybe you've come to your position for this moment is scandalous. Like to think, wait, you're suggesting that God is using the fact that I broke his law here in this situation? It really, it makes a lot of scholars, people that study it makes them uncomfortable because of the moral ambiguity here. Like, is he suggesting that even though she broke the law, he was still, yes. The idea is that God uses people as they are, where they are. In the midst of her brokenness, right? In the midst of her issues, her mistakes, her doubts, her blatant her shortcomings, Mordecai looks at her with confidence and suggests, who knows, but that you've come to your position for this moment. Maybe you're here for a reason. It's as if he says to her, like in the moment where she could so easily give into hopelessness and helplessness, what's the point? There's not much I can do and it won't make much of a difference. In that moment, he looks at her and in essence says, there is a purpose to the position that you're in. There's a purpose to the position that you're in. What if we lived like that? Or what if we were open to the possibility that you are where you are, when you are, the way you are, for a reason, right now? Just think about how that would change the way you go about your day. We are so quick to give into like, I'm just Lou, I'm just me. What can I do? It's not gonna make much of a difference. But what if we lived like maybe there's a reason I'm here? I think our marriages need spouses that believe that they're in that relationship for a reason. I believe that your kids, if you have kids, I believe your kids need parents who believe they're their parents for a reason. I believe our schools need teachers who believe they're teachers in that school for a reason. Our students in our school need to be told that they're there for a reason. And maybe they can't see it at the time, right? Like they had no idea what was going on, why, how it's all working together. But just knowing maybe there's a reason can totally change the decisions that we make. And so what if we were open to that? What if we went to work every day believing whether I like this here or not, maybe I've come to this place for this time. Even though I've got my issues, even though I'm not thrilled about the way I got this job, even though I've got A, B, C, and D, maybe I'm here for a reason. It could totally change the way we approach the everyday aspects of our lives. If we lived at least open to the fact that there is a purpose to the position that we're in right now, whether it's a good one or a hard one that seems impossible, insurmountable, where we have every reason to give into hopelessness and say, what's the point? What can I do in this school? What can I do in this workplace? This marriage is down the toilet. This friendship is over. But maybe there's a purpose. Maybe you've come to this place for such a time as this. Even though God may seem totally absent. I'm going to ask the band to come up here, but I want to leave you with this story. When I was in high school, I just was making a world of terrible decisions. My mom used to get together with her friends, and they would just pray and cry about the decisions I was making. I don't think they do that anymore, though maybe they do, I don't know. And there was one night in particular where I just got into a lot of trouble. And it was one of those nights where I got in trouble and everything else came out. And I remember waking up the next day and my dad came up to me, reached over my nightstand. He took my cell phone. He's like, you're not going to need this for a while. And I just knew things were not looking good. I was going to be grounded for a while. And while this is happening, my sister was dating this guy who just took an interest in me. He knew I was making terrible decisions on a regular basis. He knew I was in trouble because I was doing dumb things and deserved it. But every time I came home, he would just stop to talk to me, see how I was doing. He would give me advice, but not the make you feel bad kind of advice. I knew he was a person of faith, but he never made me feel bad about myself. And then this weekend when I got grounded, he asked me to come to this conference. And so I had a choice. I was like, well, I could sit in my room, in a house my parents weren't happy with me right now, or I could go to New Jersey, And I got on this bus, and for me, that weekend was the beginning of a lot of change in my life. Things could have looked totally different for me if that didn't happen. Now, this guy was not my friend specifically. He was dating my sister. But while I never heard him say this, he lived like he was in my life for a reason. There was a purpose to the position he was in. And even now, sometimes he'll watch our services online, he'll say something nice to me, and I tell him, I don't think I'd be here if it were you, if it weren't for you. I think there are things that hang in the balance. There may be people in your life who are counting on you to recognize that maybe you are where you are for a reason. That there's a purpose to the position that you're in right now. Let's pray together. God, we're grateful that you love us. We're grateful that we can choose to live with purpose, that we be open to the fact that we are where we are for a reason, even when we're messy, imperfect, lacking the answers, and maybe not even thrilled about how we got to where we are. Would you give us eyes to see what you're doing in our lives? Give us eyes to see the next right thing, the next step, and give us the courage and the strength we need to take it. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. We're going to sing one last song together. You're welcome to stand and join us.
much time worrying. You've had a plan all along. I'm listening. You made a way out of deserts and rivers just yesterday. So today, if I hear you speak, I don't need an explanation. If you tell me move, I don't need the destination. If what's promised I never see, I'm still walking with you. You're still walking with me. Yeah. Redeem all the time I spent wandering. You've been the fire and the cloud I'm following. You made a way out of bondage and darkness just yesterday. So today, if I hear you speak, I don't need an explanation. If you tell me move, I don't need the destination. What's been promised, I will believe. I'm still walking with you. You're still walking with me. If I know one thing, our God is a deliverer. If I know one thing, our God is gonna see us through. If I know one thing, our God is a deliverer. If I know one thing, our God is gonna see us through. If I know one thing, our God is a deliverer. If I know one thing, our God is gonna see us through. If I know one thing, our God is a deliverer. If I know one thing, our God is gonna see us. He'll see us through. See us through. Never alone in the battle.
Sing out.
He'll see us through.
Never alone in the desert.
He'll see us through.
Never alone in the fire.
He'll see us through.
He'll see us through. Never alone in the water.
He'll see us through.
Never alone in depression.
He'll see us through.
Never alone in addiction.
He'll see us through.
He'll see us through. And he'll see us through. In all our anxiety, I know he'll see us through. In the darkest thoughts, my Jesus, he'll see us through. In every circumstance, I know he'll see us through. He'll see us through. If I know one thing, our God is a deliverer. If I know one thing, our God is gonna see us through. If I know one thing, our God is a deliverer. If I know one thing, our God is gonna see us. He'll see us through. He'll see us through.
God bless you guys. Have a wonderful day. We will see you next time.